Hello. I wanted to visit with you today about some family history. You can see behind me over my shoulder a scene of where some pioneers are going in covered wagons. My grandmother, Munsey, Nora Frances Bond Williams, was born in 1900, moved to Oklahoma not long after that, and they came in a covered wagon. She lived to be 98 years old, and before she passed away, she flew to Detroit, Michigan in a jet airplane to visit her son. The technological advance that has taken place in the time of Munsey's lifetime from 1900 to 1998 was more advancement than in all previous recorded history from a technology standpoint. Now, my father was born in 1912. He too moved to Oklahoma in a covered wagon when he was 4 years old. And in his lifetime, from his death in 2007, from Munsey's death in 1998, those roughly 10 years, there was more technological advance in those 10 years than in the period of time that Munsey had lived. So we had a doubling effect again. From the time Dad passed away in 2007 until Mom passed away in 2018, again, 10 years' time, we had another doubling effect. Mom had lived to be 102, born in 1918. It's fascinating to me the technological advancement that they've had in this world since I was born. When I was born, we did not have tractors to drive in the fields. We drove teams. And I remember when I was young, in fact, I've told one particular story about me harrowing a field behind a team. After that, I drove teams for quite a while to do plowing, to do planting, to do harvesting. Some of the old time pictures, for instance, harvesting wheat. They would have as many as 16 head of horses hooked to a combine. And the combine didn't thrash the grain like we know of our combines today. It simply cut the wheat off, put it in bundles, and stacked it on the ground. And then you had to come by and with pitchforks, pick those bundles up and throw them on a wagon, drive the wagon to where the harvester, the combine, if you will, was setting still, and they then fed those into the thresher, they called it. It wasn't a combine, to get the wheat out. And today we simply drive down through the field with huge, wide headers on our combines and harvest the same amount of wheat in a matter of minutes that would take us hours and days when I was young. But I wanted to share that with you a little bit to have you appreciate what we have today. Here I sit in my living room with a video camera that it doubles as my telephone. In my lifetime, now we had telephones when I was young. Actually, I was 8 years old before we got our first telephone. And the telephone was a wooden box that was about 8 inches wide, 6 inches deep, and 18 inches tall, hung on the wall. It had a microphone sticking out of the middle of it on about a 10-inch metal rod, and then had a little mouthpiece type thing. And your ear to hear was on a cord that hung on the side of the telephone box. And we've come all the way to where, I can call anyone I want and never touch the phone. All I have to do is tell Siri, if you will, to call whoever I want that's in my contact list. Amazing. And I really do believe that we're just on the cusp of the technological advance in the world today. We have great things in front of us. You young people have an opportunity to do things quicker and easier than any of your ancestors even dreamed about. Speaking of dreaming about, when Dad was young, they had a comic book that was Buck Rogers. And Buck Rogers flew a jet airplane. Now, this was at the same time that Kitty Hawk was taking place and the Wright brothers were flying their first plane, that they had this comic book shortly thereafter. And that's what he grew up with. And so there are people who have visions for the future. When I was growing up, we had comic books that had Dick Tracy. And Dick Tracy had a watch that was a two-way radio. He could talk into it, and his compadres could hear him. Now we have Bluetooth, and we have all of the various mechanisms that are available to us. The first television that I ever saw was at a neighbor's house. He had gotten a TV, and he invited us all over one evening to watch the wrestling. There was going to be wrestling on that night. And we had gone over, it was Lige Whatley's house, and we had gone over to his house, and my three older brothers, Denny, Donnie, and Ira, Dad, and Mom and Mrs. Whatley were in the kitchen visiting, but Lige and Dad and the four boys were out in the living room watching this 9-inch TV. And I looked around and everybody was asleep but me. I was young and I hadn't worked hard in the field that day. I was 5 or 6. But that was the first TV I ever saw. When I was 12, Dad and I had hauled a load of watermelons to town to sell and had sold those. And it was in the fall, and Dad says, I think I'd like to watch the World Series that started that afternoon. And so we went to a store and we bought a 9-inch black and white TV, took it home, plugged it in, set the rabbit ears up on it, and watched the first batter bat in the World Series that year. And today we have so many avenues of doing things that it's unreal. All of my grandchildren are proficient in computers, as is our son Russell and Thea. They all use them as a commonplace thing every day. They were not commonplace very long ago. When Russell was, I don't know, he was 10, maybe 11, 12. We were living in Idaho, and Kamari had been doing some writing, and she bought an old Commodore. For those of you who are old enough and have a history of computers, it was not really a computer, it was a word processor. And it had a keyboard similar to what we have today, but much smaller, and it was all housed in the one thing. Well, Kamari and I had gone to town and we came home, and Russell was in the living room floor, and he had everything that could be taken apart out of that Commodore. And his mother asked him, knowing that there was no point in scolding, here he had taken her word processor apart. She asked him, can you put it together? And he answered, oh yeah. And he did. He put it together and it worked fine. But those experiences have been good to Russell all of his life. He now is in charge of a lot of software and programs for a company called IPC. But the technological advance that we've seen in his lifetime, in the lifetime of my grandchildren, I go to dinner with some of them here, and they talk about coding and what this will do and what that will do, and their grandfather is left out in the dark because I understand what it is, but I don't know how to use it, and don't claim to, and don't have any desire. And yet I'm grateful that I have sitting in front of me an iPhone that can take this camera and we can manipulate it a little bit and get it to all of you to watch. So you have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you later.